True story, The Man in the Walls. Based on a documented real event in the U.S. Frank Bowen threw open the closet door like he was ripping open a secret. He had been shouting for help for hours, but the house had been full of a slow, impossible quiet. The floorboards creaked under his feet. The girls' whispers had dried into a thin, scared silence. When the door hit the wall, a smell like old food and grease hit his face, and a figure slid out of the dark like a shadow that forgot how to be quiet. The man was small and wild-eyed, his hair stuck up in spikes. His face was smeared with red and pale streaks that looked like ketchup and mayo someone had rubbed on in a fit. In his hand he held a hatchet and, in the other, a wrench. He smiled in a way that was not a smile. For a second, Frank thought it was a joke. Then the man swung the hatchet once in the air and barked. "Don't move and I won't hurt you!" The girls screamed. The world narrowed to the cold metal in his hands and the heat behind Frank's eyes. The man's breath came fast. He moved like an animal that had been hiding too long. He told them in a low voice that he had been in their house for months. He told them he watched. He told them he heard everything. He said he had been waiting. At first, Frank tried to reason. He offered the man a chair and coffee, because that is what some people do when faced with something they do not understand. The man laughed, a small, sharp sound. He said he liked to hide in walls, where things were quiet and you could learn a family's secrets. He asked for permission as if asking made it less wrong. The girls clung to each other. The youngest hid behind Frank's leg. The man moved from room to room with the easy terror of someone who knows a house too well. He pointed out how he had slipped through a loose board in the attic, how he would fold himself in narrow spaces no bigger than a foot and press his back against insulation, while the family lived inches from him. He named the missing things he had taken: a box of cereal, a favorite watch, odd coins. He said it like a list of trophies. He told them he had put their toothbrushes by his bed sometimes, and once, he slept wrapped in a sweater with their scent. The family was held by 1,000 small betrayals. At one point he sat on the floor and opened his palms wide, showing his empty hands. He told Frank to keep his eyes on him. "You'll thank me," he said, as if he were handing out a warning and a gift at the same time. The girls shivered. Frank thought of calling the police. The man noticed the movement and slammed the wrench on the table as a demonstration. The sudden bang stopped Frank's hand like a cut wire. The tension in the room was thick enough to hold the air. After what felt like a long time, the man let them go to the living room and told them to sit. He wanted food. He wanted to hear voices. He claimed he had nowhere else to go. He said he had once asked the eldest daughter out on a date, and she had been kind enough to talk to him. He kept calling her by name, as if naming someone made them close. No one could breathe right. Then the sirens came, faint at first, a thread of sound that made every head turn. The man's eyes flicked to the window, and then to the door. He smiled, small and dangerous, and told them someone would come and take them away and nothing would change, because someone could always hide. Before anyone could stop him, he pushed past the girls and ran. He ran like he had been practicing running for months in dark crawl spaces and thin attic eaves. He vanished down the lane like a ghost who had found a new place to be invisible. The family stayed in the living room, hands held and bodies shaking. The police found the path he had taken: a loose board in the attic, a tiny gap behind a closet molding, a narrow space that had been hollowed out just enough for a thin person to curl in and be still. They found evidence of someone living there: bits of food, matches, torn paper, and a sleeping place of flattened cardboard and old clothes. No one slept well for weeks after that. The house felt marked. Then the story repeats in cruel ways. The police arrested a young man named Daniel LaPlante. He was only a teenager. When they pulled him free from his hiding places and took him to the station, he answered their questions in a way that was part child and part old hurt. He told them he had wanted to be near the family, that he had been lonely after his own life felt broken. He said the walls felt like a safe place where he could watch and not be watched. He did not use the word scary, but everything he said made the officers feel that word in their mouths. That terrible night, The moment when the closet door was thrown open and the family saw him, was the worst thing that had happened, but it was not the beginning. Weeks later, after the initial shock faded into a fearful routine, the piece of paper that tied everything together was read at a small table in broken sentences. LaPlante had dated the elder daughter once, and then stalked her when she stopped seeing him. He had been seen around the neighborhood, odd and rough, lying about his age. He had been to psychiatrists when he was younger, an officer said, and people who knew him used words like trouble and chaos. His life was a mess of bad nights and mean adults, and something inside him had decided hiding in a house would make him feel safe. To understand how a person could live inside a home for months, you have to imagine silence as a space. The Bowen girls would wake and hear tiny noises in the walls that a house makes, settling, mice, wind, and they would think the house was talking. Then small items would go missing. A sock here, a remote there. They stopped thinking about it openly because adults told them to be sensible. But they started to leave lights on and to sleep with the television on until it felt like the house had company. Sometimes they left notes on the fridge that said, "Don't forget dinner." And once they found those same notes later in a place behind the dryer, wrinkled and dirty. It was a game someone else was playing for a long time. The family told neighbors that they thought maybe a raccoon had been getting into the attic. They told themselves the noises were their imaginations. When the eldest daughter told her father that she had once met a boy on the phone and gone on a date, Frank thought the boy was harmless. Teenagers brought home strange people sometimes. That was the world. But then small things multiplied. The house started to feel watched. The girls' friends stopped coming over. Somewhere between missing coins and the smell of someone sleeping in a crawl space, the house became a place that made you look over your shoulder. Police investigators would later say that LaPlante knew how to slip into a home without being seen, not because he was a brilliant criminal, but because he was small and patient, and used the kind of tricks burglars learn from watching houses. He could slip through a loose board, squeeze into a slim cavity behind drywall, and when night came he could move. He did not take the family's biggest valuables. He took small things, things that had the sound of life, a hair tie, a spoon, a small toy. He used the items to prove he had been there without making the house empty. After he was caught, the Bowen family thought it would end. But the law did what the law does, blunt and slow. LaPlante was young. He had no long history of prison. He had been arrested, and for a while he was charged with the home invasion. The town worried that he might come back. People held neighborhood meetings and checked their doors twice at night. The Bowen family got new locks and slammed them extra hard. Some nights, Frank sat awake listening to the house, because once you know something has been hiding inside it, you cannot forget the space where it could hide again. Then, to the family's shock and the town's worry, LaPlante was released on bail. He went home, where time folded back into halves. Ordinary life for some, a dangerous loose end for others. The news of his release felt like a cut across the quiet town. Frank watched the man who had terrified his family walk free as if the world had decided to forgive a secret. He tried not to imagine the places the young man could go, the houses he might find. He tried to believe the law had done its work. But LaPlante did not step back into a safe, calm life. Instead, being free gave him room to do other things. He did not stop hiding who he was. He started breaking into other homes, and the quiet mouse-like movements turned into something sharper. People noticed jewelry missing, small cash gone, a neighbor's gun later found in a laundry basket where it should not be. The town exchanged glances and worried about what a free young man with a habit for hiding in walls could become. At night, Frank would sit at his kitchen table and look at the dark house. He would imagine the small spaces in the walls and the way a person could fold themselves into a cave of insulation and be invisible. He would think about how the same hands that had taken a spoon could later pick up a knife. He would think about the kids in the neighborhood and their small lives that made houses sound like music. The release on bail was supposed to be a pause, a chance for the system to decide. For the Bowens, it was a beginning of a new fear. Only later would the town learn how dangerous it could be when a person like LaPlante roamed free. For the Bowen family, the closet where the man had stepped out and declared himself was a place you avoided, like a bruise. For the community, it was the start of a chain of events that would end in a horror no one wanted to tell aloud. The house on that lane kept its quiet, but the world outside it started to change in ways that would make headlines and pull officers into long nights of chasing a boy who had learned to live without being seen. That night, after the man bolted into the dark, the family sat in trembling silence and opened their hands to the cold. They did not know then what would happen next. They only knew a man had been in their walls, and he had smiled like he was proud. Weeks later, the news would spread that the same young man had been linked to a crime worse than anyone had imagined. The town would wake to sirens and to stories that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But for now, the Bowen home was quiet in a way that meant the house itself had been changed. The family tried to breathe. They locked doors. They prayed. And somewhere in the dark, a young man who had learned to hide in the hollow parts of the world was out, and he was not finished. The town woke slow the morning the papers printed the headline. People read the small column over coffee and then read it again because the words did not fit the ordinary world. A young man who had hidden inside walls was now accused of something much worse. The word murder hung in the air like a bad smell you could not make go away. Mothers hugged children closer. Men at the gas station spoke in low voices. The Bowen house looked the same from the street, but everyone who knew it felt the shape of danger like a bruise. For a while, officials tried to make order of it. Detectives went through LaPlante's few belongings and a long list of places he had been. They checked his history, the small schools he had attended, the jobs he had not kept. They interviewed people who had seen him in town, a cashier who remembered him paying with crumpled bills, a neighbor who remembered a skinny figure slipping past the hedge at night. Pieces of a life that had been ignored came back like puzzle parts. Some pieces fit, and some did not, but all of them made a picture that frightened people. The Bowens answered questions the right way at first. They told the police all the things they could remember, from the sound the man had made when he crawled through the closet to the exact brand of cereal he said he'd taken. For weeks, Frank found himself replaying the night in his head, measuring how close the man had been to the girls, wondering what would have happened if he had reached for his phone or tried to run. The girls went to school under the shadow of what had happened. They learned to check the space under their beds and to lock their bedroom doors even though they were all still so young. A neighbor installed motion sensor lights. Another family put bars on their basement windows. Then, as the season moved on, new reports came in from other towns. A house 2 towns over had been broken into at night. A woman reported that small things had been taken. Later, a man found his jewelry box empty. The police began to notice a pattern. The thief did not take the most valuable things. He took small, personal goods, a child's toy here, a keepsake there. It matched the pattern from the Bowen home. A person who wanted to feel close to others by taking what made them people. People talked about why someone would do that. Some said it was about power, a quiet control. Some said it was about loneliness, a sad need to touch what other people had. Others said the man was dangerous and nothing should explain it. The debate moved like a cold front through the town. It did not help that LaPlante had been young. A teenager committing crimes twisted the meaning of fear. It made people look at teenage boys differently. It made parents watch their kids more closely. Not everyone agreed on what to do. The legal system moved slowly. LaPlante saw a judge who read the list of charges and then set conditions and bail. Some people said the system was right to give a young man a second chance, to treat him as someone who could be fixed. Others felt the decision was blind, as if a paper on a desk could not see the dark of a person. When the door to the courtroom closed on the day LaPlante walked free on bail, the town felt the injustice in the way you feel thunder before rain. After he left the courthouse, LaPlante's life did not straighten out. There are always choices after freedom. He chose badly. The small thefts became bolder. Windows were opened quietly. Doors left unlocked in the dark welcomed a small body slipping inside. People woke and found drawers disturbed. Neighbors put up flyers. The sheriff's office increased patrols. The town held a meeting in the church basement where faces shone under fluorescent lights, and everyone talked at once about how to keep their houses safe. Then someone disappeared. It was a name that people did not want to say out loud. A woman who worked at the post office did not show up for her shift. At first, people assumed she was sick. A coworker texted and got no reply. The day wore on. Someone checked her little house at the end of a quiet street and found the front door open. Inside, nothing appeared to be missing, and yet the room felt wrong. Police walked through and later carried out small pieces of evidence. The search crawled across town. Volunteers lined roads with flashlights. Families put up posters with a photo and a phone number. The press came and asked the same tired questions. Had she had enemies? Was there a fight? Where had she been last seen? Detectives followed leads. They checked phone records. They looked at URLs and at credit card receipts. They scoured surveillance from convenience stores and traffic lights. It was slow work and tedious and important. Little clues that seemed meaningless at first became keys. A camera on a side street recorded a small figure at night, moving against the wet pavement. A witness remembered seeing a young man near the mailbox on the night the woman had vanished. Meals were eaten quickly at the police station, and officers slept at their desks in shifts. Then evidence linked back to LaPlante. It was not dramatic like in movies. It was small and steady and cruel. An item was found that the missing woman had been known to carry. It turned up in a place LaPlante had frequented, a laundromat behind a dryer, a bench where he sometimes slept. Detectives began to see the same pattern. The objects he took were the map of his steps. They pulled fingerprints and compared shoe prints. Each match did not shout innocence or guilt. Each match whispered danger. The town panicked. People stopped leaving their homes after dark. The school district sent emails about safety. Some children were kept home for a week. The Bowen family began to fear that the nightmare had not been a single bad night but the beginning of something that would not stop. Frank slept with the lamp on. He checked the house at 3 a.m, walking slowly from room to room, because once the idea of someone in your walls exists, it never fully leaves. The detectives moved on the lead and arrested LaPlante again. This time, the charges were more serious. The court did not speak lightly. The town watched the legal machinery turn. Families held their breath while the system made its decisions the only way it knew how, through evidence and testimony. At the arraignment, the prosecutor described the pattern of theft and the now suspected disappearance. The judge set bail much higher. There were questions asked about how a young man could go from hiding in a closet to being suspected in a severe crime. Everyone asked the same question in 100 different ways. How could this happen so quickly? As the courtroom emptied, there was no satisfaction in the way justice seemed to move. Some said it had caught up. Others said the wheels of law were slow and could not undo what had been done. The family who had been terrorized by months of small thefts watched from the gallery, feeling that their story had grown teeth and was biting the town. Then a new detail came to light that made everyone colder. Detectives found a list of houses in a small notebook tucked into a backpack the boy had carried. Next to one address was a tiny scribble. "Nice light. Easy entry." Detectives traced the handwriting and found that it matched notes taken in the Bowen house, notes about the family's routine and small comforts. The discovery made the whole thing feel deliberate, cold, and planned. It meant the sleeping in walls was not only about hiding. It was about choosing. People started to wonder if the Bowen family had truly been lucky the night he was found. They worried about other families who might be marked and had not yet noticed. Those worries moved into whispers at PTA meetings and the checkout line at the supermarket. Neighbors installed extra locks and cut down bushes that might offer cover. The town's sense of safety shifted quietly from certainty to caution. While the detectives placed LaPlante in holding and prepared their case, the town tried to stitch its life back together. Yet the smallest noises made people flinch. A blown-out light bulb at the corner store could startle a mother into checking the road. Dogs barked at night where no mail carrier was. The Bowen family tried to live ordinary days. The girls went to school with new backpacks. Frank went to work and tried to keep his voice steady on phone calls. But the knowledge that someone had read their routines and watched them like a story kept running under their skin. Then, on a gray Wednesday when people tried to believe the worst was behind them, something happened that made the town forget to breathe. A detective called Frank and asked him to come to the station. The voice on the line was formal, a hard edge cut through it. When Frank arrived, he was led into a small interview room where an evidence bag sat waiting on the table like a small accusation. Inside it were items that belonged to the missing woman, a necklace, a hair clip, and mixed among them, a scrap of paper with a name Frank knew too well. His name. The scrap had been folded to hide it. When the detective unfolded it, Frank felt as if his chest had been reached into. The paper was part of a list. It was a list of things the boy had written down, the houses he had marked. Next to one address, in a hurried, messy scrawl, was the word, checked. Next to another, a line had been drawn. Then, in a place that should have been safe for his daughters, Frank's name had been written, as if on a menu the boy had been choosing from. The detective looked at Frank with steady eyes. "We found this on him," he said. "We think he was planning. We think he was watching." Frank felt cold go up his spine and into his teeth. He had thought the danger had been a single night that had passed. Now the list proved that it had been only the beginning. The paper on the table showed a map of choices, and his house was on it. Outside the window of the station, the light was gray and the parking lot was wet. Frank sat very small under the hum of fluorescent lights and tried to remember the night the man had climbed from the closet. He tried to remember where the hatchet had been, whether he could have done something differently. The detective said words that were meant to help, that they were doing everything they could, that they would keep the family safe, but the words were thin against the thing that the paper proved. That night, Frank drove home slowly, the weight of the scrap folded in his pocket like a hot coal. He checked every lock and pushed a chair under the doorknob, the old tricks people do to feel like they are building a wall. He stood at the doorway, looking into the dark living room filled with familiar shapes that had turned dangerous. The house had been a home, but the house had also been a hiding place for someone who did not belong. When he climbed the stairs to check on his children, his hand brushed the wall, and he felt a tiny vibration under the plaster, like the faintest tread of a giant insect. For a second his brain refused to make sense of it. Then the sound came again, a careful, quiet scraping, as if something small had moved behind the insulation above his head. Frank froze, listening with his whole body. The house had always made noises, but now the noises carried meaning. The paper, the list, the found items, they all folded into the sound. He moved toward the ceiling, his heart loud and new in his chest. He put his ear to the wall and heard nothing at first, then, faintly, the whisper of movement. It could have been mice. It could have been the heating system. It could have been anything. But the image of the list with his name on it would not leave. The town had once thought the threat was gone because the boy was in custody. The paper and the sound argued otherwise. Far away, officers were preparing for the next steps in the case. In houses across town, people double-checked windows. The moon rose pale and thin. Marked by ink and by fear, the Bowen house waited. And in the hush of the night, while Frank stood listening and the town shifted beneath its own worry, a sound came from inside the walls, a slow, steady scrape that stopped him cold. The Bowens left the house soon after that terrible night. It sat empty for months, then a young couple bought it, saying they didn't believe in ghost stories. For a while, things were fine. They repainted, fixed the roof, and laughed whenever someone mentioned the man in the walls. But one winter evening, the wife found a loose vent in the basement. Behind it was a small hollow. Inside were old objects, a rusted spoon, a broken toy, and a faded newspaper clipping about a family terrorized by an intruder. She felt a chill but brushed it off. That night she heard faint tapping from the wall beside her bed, slow, steady, and deliberate. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. She told herself it was the pipes, but the sound came again the next night, and the next. Weeks later, the couple moved out quietly, never explaining why. Today, The house still stands in Pepperell, Massachusetts, freshly painted, neatly kept. But locals say that on some nights, when the wind dies and the world goes still, you can hear something faint from inside the walls, a soft, careful scraping, like someone still waiting to be found.